I think I've always been a bit conflicted about Fallout 4 because I do enjoy it an awful lot, but I agree that it's a lot simpler than the earlier Bethesda games, and in simplifying things, certain aspects are lost. If we look at the difference between Morrowind and Fallout 4, for instance, the first one is very much in the RPG genre. You have to pick a class, you have to stick to that class in order to be effective. Compared to Fallout 4 with its perk tree, you're kind of a blank slate when you start, and you can be a jack of all trades and ultimately a master of all trades. The philosophy is very different. I think the fear is that you lose the uniqueness of a roleplay experience for the sake of player gratification. You can see it in Fallout 4 in terms of how twitchy it has become. It's now basically a FPS game that's the system where you freeze time and choose targets is much less in your face. Why is that a problem? Maybe it's not. It's just different. Almost you could say that Bethesda's games have morphed from one genre to another. I think the general fear is its games will become so simple that they will lose the elements that make them great. Does Fallout 4 oversimplify? Now, certainly for myself, when I return to Morrowind, I find it very frustrating, the idea that visually there's a disconnect between you swinging your sword and not hitting the character on screen. That's always kind of been a problem. How do you solve that? Well, you either go very stat-based and don't have this interactive clicky combat, or you do what Bethesda is doing and make the game more action-focused. And yes, if you point in the right place and click at the right time, you will hit. And that's the way they've chosen to go. Is it better? I think it is better. For me personally, I understand that people miss the complexity of the earlier games, but I like the movement, I like the combat in Fallout 4 much better than Fallout 3 now. That game seems tedious by comparison and much slower. I think ultimately they know what they're doing and they're actually making better games, and Fallout 4 is a good example of that. I find it difficult to articulate because, broadly speaking, Fallout 4 is tied with Skyrim for my favourite Bethesda game, but every time I think about specific elements, I can point to problems. So, for instance, the graphics. I remember when Fallout 4 came out in 2015. Time has flown. But even back then, it wasn't particularly impressive. It was fine. And you can see it again with Starfield. At time of recording, that is coming out soon. And again, it's further on than Fallout 4, but they're not amazing graphics. And it's because Bethesda is working with this older engine. So I'm told. I'm not a technical expert, but the people who know much more about this than I do often point out to the fact that the engine is old at this stage and there's only so much you can do with it to make it look pretty and make it look modern. And watching those Starfield trailers that I've seen so far, it was like watching the Fallout 4 trailers, which is 7 or 8 years ago at this stage. I remember thinking the same thing. These characters look a bit meh. They still do. And the new games that are coming out, they still do. I think this engine is holding Bethesda back, but maybe it's difficult to create. Well, we know it is difficult to create a new engine for yourself, and the creation engine is something they've been using for many years. Obviously offers them something in terms of versatility that other things don't, or they would use another engine. People are really swayed by graphics. There's something about this engine. Maybe it's economics. It's just they don't want to pay to license another engine, or they don't want to invest to create a new engine. I think in terms of how the world is designed and the atmosphere, it's good, but the graphics are never anything to write home about. And as a result, no matter when a Bethesda game is created, even the ones that aren't released yet, they always look slightly dated. And I'm not a graphics snob. I will play games that have very basic pixel graphics and enjoy them very much. But if you're trying to attract a modern audience, I think it's something that might accumulate over time and become a problem in terms of, will people buy this because they immediately look and think that looks old or not AAA enough? In terms of the world, Fallout 4 is a lot more condensed than previous games, and again, there are pros and cons. So do you like the sense of a much more a wider space? If you compare it to something like New Vegas, you feel like you're traveling a lot further in that game. Came out in 2000 and 2010, Fallout 4 is 2015. It's kind of weird though. I mean, New Vegas actually it was created by a different company with help from Bethesda, so really a lot of time passed between their previous Fallout game and this one. Fallout 3 was 2008. That's a 7 or 8 year gap between games in this franchise. I know they released Skyrim in the intervening time, but you can kind of see with Bethesda games, it's kind of weird. You can chart the trends in gaming because there are these great swathes of time between releases. For instance, in between Skyrim and Fallout 4, a gap of 4 years, you could see the rise of survival games, things like Rust, DayZ, open worlds, not role plays in the traditional sense of a Bethesda game, but because the worlds of those games and the worlds of Bethesda games are so open, there was this sort of sense of, should these Bethesda games be more survival focused? And you can see it with, you know, the mods that were added to Skyrim, which gave people the chance to play the game in a survival way. Bethesda even released its own official sanctioned survival mod for Skyrim, and then later for Fallout 4. Who knows, if Fallout 4 had come a little bit later, started development a little bit later, maybe those survival elements would have been there from the beginning. Bethesda games seem like a type of game that would accommodate that genre. We've already seen it morph from that very hard RPG style that it started to more FPS, to more adventure focused, more twitchy. Will it evolve even further into kind of survival rather than it being an add-on? It'd be I think it's going to be interesting to look at Starfield and see where that starts in terms of survival, having to care for your character, having to survive. I don't think it's necessarily a case of Bethesda chasing trends. It's more just the fact that there is so much time between each of their releases, and they start development at a certain time, and then through the course of, say, a 6-year development, changes happen in the industry, and what's hot changes. So they have to plan ahead to a certain extent, but also add things through the course of development that may not have been designed to be there from the beginning. I would be very surprised if Fallout 4 had the base building from the very beginning. I bet it didn't. But in terms of adding complexity, I think that is one area where, okay, we've taken away a little bit of the specificity in terms of having to choose a character and roleplay that character, but they added something that I think Minecraft really brought home for a lot of people, is that people want to build a home. They want a place to exist in these games that they play, and that's why you have the base building in Fallout 4, which does not exist. The only big AAA Bethesda game to have anything really of any note in terms of having a home would be Skyrim's. The Hearthfire expansion that they added, and that seemed very piecemeal, but Fallout came out with this suite of options that they've expanded later, so you can really create your settlements, you can manage those settlements, you can have people farming, living their lives. It can be basically a base building survival sim where you look after these communities and don't do the main quest line. That's all because of the rise of survival games, and specifically Minecraft. Sometimes you get the sense that Bethesda is picking and choosing from various trends, and sometimes being very intelligent in terms of the way games are going, following the trend of things. Hard RPG games are less popular than they used to be. They tend to be crowdfunded CRPGs now. Things are becoming more accessible for a broader market. There's also the fact that if you want things on console, you do have to go that way, and console is a huge market, and I think that's another reason that people worry about well, there's two ways to look at it. If you're being pessimistic, you would say it's dumbing down. If you were being optimistic, you would say it's streamlining the gameplay in terms of taking away some of those RPG elements. I would tend towards the liking it rather than disliking it. I've always been a player who starts a game without a clear path for my character, and I often found the necessity to pick a class before you even know what the game is like and what you're going to be doing, what you're going to enjoy. Locking yourself into a class, I always felt that was annoying. So for me, actually having it more open and letting you choose the skills that are useful as you use them, and find out what where you want to focus as you play feels more organic to me, but I can totally see the fact that it does take away the uniqueness and basically means anyone can be a master of everything. That's not realistic. Again, roleplay. A good example of these different genres melding together into Bethesda games at the moment might be the narrative dissonance that takes place in Fallout 4 with the main questline, which is a desperate search for your son, as opposed to, well, just take your time building up the Commonwealth and helping all these random people and settlers. I think there's always going to be an element of that in any game that gives you freedom but also has a main quest line. So it's not something that is exclusive to Bethesda, but it does feel weird, and it's on my mind a lot of the time when I'm playing. That's the first time I went through. That was the reason I got the main quest line out of the way. But you could just ignore it if you like. Are you a story-based, narratively driven game with a strong drive and motivation for your character, or do you want players to meander through your world? Well, we want both. You can't really do it without it jarring in the player's mind. I mentioned briefly the world. It is less open. It's not less open, it just feels smaller. I remember looking at the map when I opened it for the first time in 2015 and feeling like, wow, it's so small, but they are packing everything together much closer. There's a lot more incident, a lot more to find, and a lot more to do in Fallout than any other previous Fallout game. So you will never be bored, but you do lose that sense of exploration a little bit. It's like the anticipation of finding something is lost if incident, characters, missions, excitement is just falling across your path constantly. I kind of like that sense of just wandering, and I miss it a little bit. I think I actually played New Vegas more because of the sense of this than Fallout 3. You know, setting out across the desert and feeling like I'm traveling, I've traveled miles, it's going to take me ages to get back. You never really feel that in the same way in Fallout 4. There are other games you can play that. Generally speaking, they tend to be more indie games, more kind of your Daisies and your Rusts and your Arks, if you want that kind of exploration. So they're definitely not getting away from the questing and the story. There's lots of story. I mean, Fallout 4 is packed full of much more story and incident. That is one thing, again, I'm conflicted about. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but the Fallout 4 was the first game in which the protagonist was fully voiced, and
Codsworth? You're still here.
That's not the voice I want for my character. You've got a lot of customization options in terms of how they look, but the voice is absolutely huge in terms of how you relate to a character. They also brought in the streamlined, let's be nice about it, dialogue options. So fewer dialogue options, and you kind of have, there's no shorthand to say this, you have four options, and they will all give you an overview of the general gist of what you're going to say before you say it. But oftentimes this way of handling dialogue leads to your character saying things you didn't expect or didn't intend. It's similar to BioWare does this as well, and it's something I've never particularly liked. And I'm the first one to say I don't want to read every option of what I'm going to say before I say it, because that takes time, and I don't like to do a lot of reading when I'm playing games. I like to play, not read. So they are trying to address something that I myself have identified as a problem. Again, it adds a slight disconnect between you and your character. First, he has this voice that may not be the voice that you hear in your head, and then he's saying things you didn't intend. Is this my character, or is this the developer's character? And I'm kind of just piggybacking on their intention for this quest line. Things can have unintended consequences. They can be put in for the right reasons, but they can have these unintended consequences. It's something I don't particularly like. I'm hoping for Starfield your character, at least your character, should not be voiced. I don't want a voiced protagonist. I'm so used to it in Fallout 4 now, I don't care. And they did a good job of making the voice fairly generic dude or lady. So you can implant on top of them. They're not too specific. But again, if they're not too specific and they're a little bit bland, what's the point of voicing them in the first place? Just take away the voice and let me imagine the voice that is in my head. Well, I said I didn't like reading. I don't like a lot of quest dialogue and waffle, but I do like to imagine what my character sounds like by reading the text rather than hearing it spoken for me. If nothing else, it's faster. You get through the dialogue scenes, you get through the quests faster. I would love us to be at the stage where games are like movies and they're absolutely engrossing when it comes to the cutscenes and the dialogue, but they're just not. The voice acting is not there. The stories are generally not there. Games are about gameplay and context and motivation, but not necessarily long sequences of dialogue for me with elaborate cutscenes. I will give me the general context of what I'm doing, the quest that I'm going on, and I will fill in the gaps with the gameplay. I've always felt like that. So I think Fallout 4 finds a balance. You're not stuck in dialogue for too long with people. I feel like there's generally less consequence. You get a feeling that's probably another of these things that people lament in terms of so a lot of options in dialogue. You will have to haggle for more money or try to persuade someone, but if you fail, it's not like you can't then try the other options or you can't come back later and try again. You just fail the dice roll and you can continue on with the conversation, but it very rarely leads to negative consequences. Maybe that is a flaw, and if you get the sense you can never fail or make the wrong decision, the stakes are less and it's some of the tension and interest is lost. Can always think of a counterpoint. I'm my own worst enemy sometimes. I've already thought of a counterpoint, which is, well, people just save and reload anyway. So what is the point of making it so that you fail this conversation? Because people will just save and reload it. Maybe it's sheer pragmatism that these decisions have been made on the part of Bethesda because they know gamers so well at this stage. They know what people are going to be doing. So I got into PC gaming around the time Morrowind was already a thing. I know that much. So it was the early 2000s. So I missed things like Daggerfall. I definitely missed the early Fallout games, the 2D isometric games. And so for me, the pantheon of Bethesda games that I am familiar with start with Morrowind, and I would have expected that by the time we got to 2002 for Morrowind, we get to Fallout 4 in 2015. Let's think about Starfield 2022. I would have expected there to have been greater strides made. I'm really conscious of not having mentioned 76 in this review, but I feel like for the kind of points I want to make, it's not really relevant. It's so similar to Fallout 4 in the way it looks, with the addition of multiplayer. So the kind of things that I'm concerned with, Fallout 76 doesn't really factor in. I'm very focused on the single player Bethesda games. That experience, I'm not sure how much it adds to the conversation. They are really fun games. I don't think anything else other than Bethesda really creates this kind of game that I enjoy. But I think it's graphically. I think they could be hurting themselves graphically if they don't start to look at how can we make these things look more contemporary with this old engine. It is kind of weird, but I enjoy the gameplay so much. That is one thing that I will say about Fallout 4, like all of those games, it's buggy. The creation engine, not only does it look dated, it's always been buggy, and even recently, playing the game when it's, let's say it's 7 years old, 5, 6, let's say it's 7 years old, it's still bugging, and those bugs have not been fixed. Most bugs have been left to the mod community to fix, and it's both good and bad, again, because I've dabbled. I really was into Skyrim, as anyone who's followed the channel for a while will know, to the extent that I started creating my own mods and things and really messing around with the creation kit. And I love the versatility. I love that those tools are available for gamers to mod their own games, but it may have led to this situation where Bethesda knows that they can release something and the community will step in and bug fix for them. Maybe you just don't have enough time as a developer of this type of game to fix all those bugs. They would just never come out. There are games that have been in alpha and in development now for nearly 10 years that just can't get to a stage where they're ready to be released. And maybe Bethesda thinks, look, we're never going to get there either. We just need to bring it out in a state where the community can get to grips with it. But it's very frustrating when you lose saves, and I'm playing a survival playthrough at the moment, which gives you one save or a limited number of saves for sure. And if something goes wrong, all that gameplay can be lost. It's a real thing, and it can come from anywhere. Really weird stuff. Just going around mundane things like I'm trying to get into my power armor, but it's too close to the wall, so I get stuck in an endless animation loop where I can't do anything, but I also can't, the animation can't complete, so I'm stuck. What do you do in that situation? Well, you spam escape and alt tab, and eventually the game just fritzes out and fixes itself. But it's lucky, because sometimes that doesn't happen. I haven't had any crashes to desktop. I'm not running any mods at the moment, but there are still those bugs in there. Who knows? Will Bethesda ever get to a stage where they're not releasing games that are this weird? I don't know. People say it's part of the fun of a Bethesda game, and it kind of is. It's hilarious when they do some of these silly things, but I would not say that it's acceptable, because we can find the funny side of something where so much money is at stake, and particularly right now people are struggling for cash, and this might be the only game they buy for a while. It should work. It's part of your job to create a good product for people, and it's dropping the ball if you're not doing your due diligence in terms of fixing what you can fix. Playing Fallout 3 feels like really stepping back in time. Playing Fallout 4, it feels contemporary enough to not be antiquated at this stage and have a lot in it. I think the highlights are the base building and the opportunity to tinker with the world, and I think we're going to see more of that. It's one of the highlights of Fallout 4, and I think that's where Bethesda is going to be going in the future, because it's one of the most fun aspects, to not only explore the world but to mold it to your liking. Fallout 4, when you compare it to some survival games, it's quite limited. I mean, they're in a strange situation in that, in order for it to be a story-based game where you have a quest line and stuff, they can't allow you to completely demolish the world and rebuild it in your image as you see fit, because all those quests still need to be there. So they will always have to find a balance. I think Starfield is an interesting case in point, because you can have planets that are quest hubs, and you can have planets that are completely customizable, so you can separate it up. But in a game like Fallout 4, it's harder to see how to do it. If you're thinking about playing Fallout 4, I would definitely say that there's a lot to get out of it. Take your time, enjoy the quest lines, don't rush. Kind of have to ignore the drive to find your son, kind of put it to the back of your mind. I think you will enjoy the game a lot more if you're not driving through the main quest line and thinking that's what you need to do. It's a game where you should meander and discover things. I would suggest actually the Bethesda survival mode. It's rather good and gives the game a little bit of added tension, because I would say that it's not very difficult. It's not very challenging, Fallout 4. There's not a lot that will stop your progression if you have a little bit of patience. You might run into some roadblocks, but you'll get through them pretty quick. You're not going to get anything that really takes some skill that you're not going to have. It's almost like an MMO in that respect. It's not about skill, it's just about perseverance, and you will eventually win. That's my review of Fallout 4. I will put up a link to my current playthrough on survival mode. Thanks for listening. I've been Napyet, and I'll see you next time.